Hello class, welcome to History 301, Armenian History, Armenia from Antiquity to Today. So if this is not your class, you might want to figure out something else to do. We will be meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 to 11:45. So please make sure you're all class meetings. We're probably going to be doing a lot of discussions in this class and less lectures, though today will be a lecture just to kind of introduce you to what Armenia is. So please try and be here and have all of your readings completed because that's going to help us a lot with what we're doing in our discussions day to day and actually understanding the material, because most of the material is learned through reading sort of in a textbook style. Although we won't be reading textbooks, we'll be reading more just like historical novels. Yes, so Armenia, what is it? It's a really big question because a lot of people don't know what Armenia is. It is not Armenian, like the doctrine of Christianity. It is totally different. You thought it was the same thing. So, what do you guys think Armenia is? Any takers?
It's a country.
It's a country. Okay. Where do you think it's located?
The Caucasus.
That's a good answer, Alex. Okay. Yes, so that is true. It's an independent republic that's located in the Middle East. It's closer to Asia, and it's home to a pretty monolithic population and a people group that has some of the oldest origins of any people group, especially in the Middle East, which is really cool. So for the next thing I wanted to do, I wanted to see sort of how much we all know. So I'm going to pass out a little handout just to like gauge our current knowledge. I'm going to give you like a few minutes to do it. It shouldn't be too hard. It's mostly just like little facts and that sort of thing. Thank you. Some you don't know, it's totally fine. That's kind of the point.
Probably wouldn't be disappointed either.
It's totally okay. Yeah, so now we're going to go over it. So for the first question, describing where Armenia is located, I figured it would be helpful to have a map, but also I realized that that map that Emily passed out is actually really useful, though it doesn't exactly have Armenia on it. It does have a lot of that on there as well. This map is kind of more focused in though, and it shows like a proposed Armenian state, so kind of ignore that. But I mean, it shows you amongst current boundaries, like where Turkey is. This is currently where Armenia is, so it's like this little guy. And all of this shows you really what the current states are. So it's kind of south of Russia, to the east of Turkey, and to the west of the Caspian Sea and kind of like below the Black Sea. It's kind of just nestled right up under there. It can get really, really cold there, also really, really hot. It's very mountainous, and a good way to describe kind of what it looks like is if you've ever been to like the Central Valley of California. It's very like fertile, with lots of like hills and like plain lands and that sort of thing, but it's also really rocky because it is so mountainous, which is something that's kind of different than, I guess, our climate would be here. Yes, so that is the answer to the first question. Can anyone name 2 important geographical features of Armenia?
I originally said the Black Sea.
Okay, I would say that's kind of makes sense because it's like at the top, although it's like not exactly, it's not really inside of it, it's more like the borders, but that's a good one. Yeah.
And then is it the Caucasus Mountains?
Yeah, that's like more towards
Georgia?
the northern boundaries and edges. The most common ones are Mount Ararat and Lake Van and Lake Sevan. Those are like the main big ones. Ararat, it's like not easy to see, but it's like kind of over here on this map, and then they did label the lakes on this map, Lake Sevan and Lake Van right there. They're like, Lake Van's really big, Lake Sevan's pretty big too, and Mount Ararat is like a huge mountain. I don't actually know the elevation, but it's pretty big. Yeah, and now we'll move on to the third question. Does anyone know the name of the first recognized Armenian kingdom? It's called Urartu, which is interesting because you're like, that kind of sounds like Ararat. It's similar.
Can you spell
And what?
Can you spell that?
Urartu.
Thank you.
Yeah. We will talk more later later on in our lecture today as we talk about ancient Armenia as to like why they have a similar name. So does anyone know what language the Armenians speak and what alphabet they use?
Armenian?
Yes. And they have their own alphabet. Fun fact. I don't know if anyone knows that, but they do. So that's kind of unique. Makes it harder to learn the language for sure, because you have to learn a whole different alphabet first. But it looks kind of similar to, I guess, like sort of Greek, some like Greek Phoenician stuff, kind of Russian. It's like a mix of a lot of things. In what year did the Armenian genocide begin? I hope is that we have one person. If we don't, that's okay. Okay, it is 1915
Oh, no.
for your future reference. I'm glad that you were close though. And what major devastating event took place in Armenia in the past 30 years? I guess it's technically 30 at this point, but it's like, not really. There was a 1988 earthquake that was really, really devastating and destroyed a lot of the country, and in most, I wouldn't say all of the country, but a lot of the country, it's like still a bunch of toppled buildings, especially in the parts where it like hit the hardest. They just haven't rebuilt in like 30 years, so it's kind of sad. And does anyone know who the current president of Armenia is? It's kind of a recent thing. Nikol Pashinyan, because they recently had a like peaceful democratic revolution past year, so they kind of got rid of their previous president and replaced him with a leader that was more of a populist people's leader who most of the country wanted to elect.
What was the name?
I could write it on the board. Oh, this is not. Oh, wow. There we go. Nikol Pashinyan. Yeah, there we go. So just for your future reference. Yeah, so during this class we're going to go over a lot because it covers from antiquity to today, so it's kind of a lot. But the purpose is really just to go over the major empires and time periods and talk about how the culture changed as a result of Christianity as well, because that was a big shift that happened around the 4th century, and the consequences that this had for the future survival of Armenia, how that affected that through the Middle Ages and onward into the modern era. We're going to start out by talking about ancient Armenia and the origins of Armenia as a distinct people group, which we're going to go over today. And then we're going to talk about the first kingdom of Armenia, the second, the third, the fourth kingdom, which was if you've ever heard of Cilicia, that's kind of what that is. The Arab invasion, the time that it was under the Byzantine Empire, as well as the Arab rule, and then going into the Ottoman Empire, how this shifted the cultural identity of Armenians, and then the Armenian genocide, time under the Soviet Union, and then also the Velvet Revolution that happened in the past year, and kind of how this affects the future of Armenia, whether or not it'll continue to be a country, all those things, whether it'll get more land, less land in the future, all those kinds of things. So yeah, that's kind of the outline for the class. We're gonna move on to talking about the land and the geography. So this is actually a photo that I took in Armenia. It's really pretty. It's got a lot of land that's like not super developed, since it is like a second world country, former Soviet republic. And historically it was 100,000 square miles. It's now only 10% of that land is in the current state of Armenia. The rest of it is now in like Turkey mainly, and Azerbaijan and countries like that that kind of surround it. If you look on the map that Emily gave, you can kind of see like a more complete picture of the region. And where it says Anatolia, that's like historically what Armenia would have been. Asia Minor to Persia, and it has two major mountain ranges in it. The Taurus, I'm trying to remember the name of the other one. I don't remember the name of the other one right now. Yes, so Mount Ararat is one of the most easily recognizable landmarks in Armenia. It's absolutely huge. And does anyone know why this mountain is significant?
They think that's where Noah's Ark landed.
It is where Noah's Ark landed, at least according to the Bible, so that's cool. Armenia also has other biblical significance because the Euphrates and Tigris rivers have their origin there, which you can actually see on the map that Emily handed out. If you follow it all the way up, it kind of goes up into Anatolia, which is cool. And then another river that Armenia has is the Arax River, which is kind of by the capital in Yerevan. And then also Lake Sevan and Lake Van are other important landmarks that pretty much help them have some other form of economy with like fishing and agriculture, and it also helps for tourism. They can have like boating and that sort of thing in the summer, and then they have kind of like ski lodges and that kind of thing in the winter, which you might not think of in Armenia, but it does exist there, which is kind of funny. So yeah, that's just a little bit about like the geography and the land. It's a really fertile place. This is a quote from the Armenians by John M. Douglas, and it kind of describes a lot of how Armenians currently feel. They have this kind of like grit in them. So I'm just going to read it. It says, "There was a time when this was the home of the Armenian people. Western Armenia is now paradise lost, a God-forsaken place where no man dares to live and no flower dares to bloom. The sun does not shine here anymore. Other men came and destroyed the country, ransacked the homes, slaughtered the people, and threw the survivors to the inhospitable deserts to perish. But the history of this people remains imperishable." And I think that's also a good reason why we should study the history of Armenia, because though it is like a small player in the world today, it has kind of been crushed to a certain extent and is like struggling to survive. I think it says something to look back at the ways that it has played a prominent role in the history of the world previously. So I wanted to talk about where they came from. Who are they? So there's a lot of different theories, some amongst academics, some just culturally what people have perpetuated for centuries. Legendary origins of the Armenians were the forefather, Haik Nahapet. He's referred to as Haik the forefather. In the pagan pre-Christian traditions, he's one of the sons of the pagan gods. But in post-Christian tradition, they kind of translated that into that after the flood, all of mankind was originated from Noah's three sons, Japheth, Ham or Ham, and Shem. And so Armenians think that they're descended from Japheth. So the Christianized new version of the legend is that Haik Nahapet is one of the sons of Torgam, who is one of the descendants of Japheth, who is one of the sons of Noah. So they like reworked it to like fit into the new like Christian tradition. I mean, it's possible that could be true as well. There's just a lot of different theories. Armenians don't call Armenia Armenia, they call it Hayastan, which comes from Haik. That's like the origin of their naming for themselves. I'm going to read from Genesis 8, where it talks about how the ark landed on Ararat. So it says at the beginning of Genesis 8, "But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and livestock with him in the boat. He sent a wind to blow across the earth, and the floodwaters began to recede. The underground waters stopped flowing, and the torrential rains from the sky were stopped. So the floodwaters gradually receded from the earth. After 150 days, exactly 5 months from the time the flood began, the boat came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. 2.5 months later, as the waters continued to go down, other mountain peaks became visible." So basically, they believe that after all the waters went down and then people began populating the earth again, that that's where people began populating the earth again, was in Armenia, which is kind of interesting. Greeks believed that Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece was actually the origins of Armenia, that the forefather of the Armenians was named Armenos Tessalatsi, and that he took part in the navigation for the Golden Fleece with Jason and the Argonauts, and then he settled in Armenia, which was named after him. So that's kind of interesting. Herodotus kind of ascribed to this one. It's a totally different take, but it's kind of interesting to at least think about. So the real question is, what really actually happened, just aside from legend and all that kind of thing? One widely held theory is that multiple Proto-Armenian Indo-European migrations onto the Armenian plateau began as early as the 2nd millennium BC. And then also recently, there's another theory that's gained a lot of prominence, that no mass migration has ever taken place there, that basically the Indo-Europeans just originated there, that's where they came from. At least modern man, once they became modern man, that's where they would have originated from. But it's generally agreed now that Armenians as a people group with their own language became distinct from just Indo-Europeans, who are the forefathers of all of European civilizations, that Armenians became distinct from them in the 3rd to 4th millennium BC, which puts them pretty far back there. But that's kind of the current theory, though they've gone through a lot of theories in the past 200 years, so you never know what's going to pop up next. So now we're going to talk about the kingdom of Urartu, which we talked about earlier as being the first recognized kingdom of Armenia. Urartian means the people of Ararat, so it kind of explains, I guess you would say, why it's named that, although it's kind of weird just because it's a transliteration issue, I think. It also, Urartu literally means Ararat in Hebrew, so that's kind of where they get the name from. They were a really highly civilized civilization during the Bronze and the Iron Age, and they produced a lot of things in the arts, specifically metalwork, which I have, right here. This is a helmet that was made in the 8th century BC, bronze, and it has an inscription of a king on it. They just did so much metalwork, it's really interesting. But we don't actually have many, we don't actually have many sources of their their history, just because there wasn't a lot written down, and anything that was written down at the time was mostly Assyrian. They were their enemies, so it was kind of biased. So most of the artifacts we have are inscriptions or architecture, artifacts like that. What else? Oh, yeah, so it emerged as a distinct kingdom around the 9th century BC, and there were a lot of different crops. They had wheat, barley, millet, and also winemaking. And they're not really sure, possible that it could have been one of the first places that wine was ever produced, and they still do that a ton there. The remains of fruit found there are plums, apples, cherries, and pomegranates. Pomegranates are actually now one of the big national symbols of Armenia and have been for millennia, and that's kind of something that's interesting about Armenia, is that a lot of the things that happened thousands of years ago kind of continue throughout time as national symbols, which is kind of interesting. And their religion was one of a mix of indigenous, Hurrian, and Mesopotamian gods, and they represented just animism and the water, earth, sun, mountains, all that kind of thing, kind of what you would think of in an ancient Middle Eastern culture. So they just had a bunch of deities, and their government was a monarchy with a close circle of advisors, and the first king, his name was Arame, and he ruled from 860 to 840 BC. And then the Urartian king Argishti I built the first military fortress, the Erebuni fortress, at the site of present-day Yerevan, which is on the Ararat plain in 782, which is the genesis of Yerevan, which is the current capital of Armenia. It's actually the 2,800th anniversary this year of the city, which is pretty crazy. Yeah, so around the 7th century BCE, they think it was destroyed. They're really not sure. It just kind of disappears. And so the kingdom just kind of goes down into the oblivion, and they don't really know exactly what happened, but they think it probably happened between 640 and 590 BC that all their cities were destroyed. And this is just a cool, like, griffin-headed demon figure that survives today. Very intricate artwork, and that's a section of the Erebuni fortress walls. The red stones that you see, it's like a type of stone that's like only found in Armenia, that they use in like all of their ancient construction. It's super cool. And so that's outside of Yerevan. You can still see that there today. The history of Yerevan is that it's the 2,800th anniversary this year, and after the Erebuni fortress was built, there was a city built nearby by another king in the mid-7th century called Teshebeni, I don't know how to pronounce that, but that was kind of also another part of Yerevan that's kind of been absorbed in the modern-day Yerevan. And so after that, after Urartu kind of fell from the 3rd to 4th century BC, it was kind of the dark ages of Yerevan, and at that point, it kind of didn't really have much importance for like millennia until recently when it became the capital after the First Republic of Armenia was established in 1918. But it just kind of didn't really have much importance, but it was important when it was first established, and just has kind of lost importance as other empires came up and other kingdoms were established, and a bunch of other cities became important, like Constantinople, but just kind of lost its importance until fairly recently, which is kind of interesting that all of a sudden this important anniversary that's become important in the past 100 years. Partly because of the Ararat plain, the fact that it's like right near the national symbol of Armenia, even though it's technically in Turkey now, it's so close that it made sense for it to be the city where they located it. So I figured we could watch this fun little video about the anniversary. So it's really short. It's like a minute.
Watch your favorite 24/7 news networks live on YouTube TV.
Մասնակցել եմ Երևանի 2750-ամյակին։ Երկու տարիներ հետո հիմա մասնակցում եմ 2800-ամյակին և տեսնում եմ ինչ մեծ տարբերություն կա, ինչքան ժողովուրդ, ինչքան եռանդորնի, ինչքան ուրախ, չգիտեմ այսպիսի ուրախ տոնախմբություն, ես դեռ չեմ մասնակցել տոնախմբության։
Ամենայնևս շատ իմ բաներ քանդված է Երևանում, բայց բավական նոր բաներ ստեղծվում են։ Եվ երևում է, որ Երևանին նորից մեծ շունչ է տված այս հեղափոխությունը եւ հուսով եմ, որ ավելի լավն է լինելու։ Դեռ 2900 թվին 3000-ամյակին ավելի լավ Երևան է սպասում։
So that is a recent development that on October 16th, the president said he's trying to force actual elections because he was always trying to just get it to a more democratic government. So they still haven't had actual elections, but the goal is that they're going to have elections so that the government kind of represents the people better. Yeah, so that was just an introduction into ancient Armenia. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the kingdoms next class, but I just wanted to finish with a fun little photo of me and Yerevan because it's fun and actually interesting. That's the city now today. It's like huge, but they managed in the past, like during Soviet times, to kind of rebuild it and have like some more modern buildings. There aren't really a lot of old buildings just because it's gone through so much siege over time. But yeah, that's the history of ancient Armenia that I don't